Dr. Kira Chun felt the Meridian Explorer shudder violently as it broke through Zarian Prime's atmosphere. Warning lights bathed the research vessel's cockpit in crimson as she fought the controls, her knuckles white against the navigation console. 20 years of deep space marine biology expeditions hadn't prepared her for this engine failure in uncharted space, alone with no backup crew. "Come on, hold together," she whispered, watching altitude readings plummet. The planet's surface rushed toward her. Dense purple forests stretched endlessly beneath twin amber suns. Her emergency protocol screamed through her mind, but there was no time for textbook procedures. Only instinct and hope. The ship struck Earth with bone-jarring force, sending Kira sprawling across the cockpit. Emergency systems died one by one, leaving her in eerie silence, broken only by cooling metal and distant alien sounds from outside. Blood trickled from a gash above her left eye as she performed a quick systems check. Life support failing. Communications dead. Emergency beacon damaged but potentially repairable. She grabbed her field kit and stumbled through the twisted airlock. Zarian Prime's air was thick and humid, carrying unfamiliar scents that made her marine biologist instincts tingle with both curiosity and concern. The forest around her crash site was unlike anything in her database's towering trees with crystalline bark that seemed to pulse with inner light, and undergrowth that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns. But it was the silence that truly unnerved her. No bird calls, no insect buzzing, no rustling of small creatures. Just dot waiting, as if the entire ecosystem held its breath. That's when she noticed the shadows moving wrong at first. She thought it was shock playing tricks on her vision. Shadows don't move independently of their sources. But these did, flowing like liquid darkness between the trees, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, always watching. Her heart rate spiked as recognition dawned. She'd heard whispered stories in deep space cantinas, dismissed them as spacer. Legends, shadow stalkers, the galaxy's apex predators. One materialized, fully just 20 meters away, a creature of impossible geometry, part shadow, part flesh, with eyes like burning coals. Then another, and another. 6 in total, she counted, trying to control her breathing. They moved with liquid grace, studying her with an intelligence that chilled her blood. Every survival protocol demanded action. Run, fight, hide, call for help. But Kira Chun was a scientist first, and something in their behavior pattern caught her attention. They weren't attacking. They were curious. These legendary killers, who had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, were approaching her like researchers studying a new specimen. In that moment of clarity, an impossible plan formed in her mind. Not escape, that was hopeless. Not combat, that was suicide. Something else entirely. Something that would either save her life or end it in the next 20 minutes. Asterisk. The first minute was the hardest. Every instinct screamed at Kira to move, to run, to do anything except sit motionless while 6 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators circled her like sharks sensing blood. Her crash-injured ribs ached with each controlled breath, and the yaw, cut above her eye, continued to weep crimson down her cheek. But she had committed to this insane gambit, and backing down now meant certain death. She drew upon meditation techniques learned during her graduate studies on the oceanic planet Kepler 442b, where she'd spent months in underwater observation. Pods studying bioluminescent deep-sea hunters. Slow, measured breaths. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 6. Her heart rate began to decrease from its panicked rhythm to something approaching. Hibernation levels. The shadow stalker's movements created subtle air currents that her skin could detect even with her eyes closed. One approached from her left. She could sense its bulk displacing the humid air. Another circled behind her, its footsteps making no sound, but creating pressure changes that her trained senses could interpret. These creatures were magnificent apex predators, perfectly evolved for their role. But Kira was beginning to understand that perfection could be its own weakness. A bead of sweat rolled down her spine. Zarian Prime's twin suns beat down mercilessly. And insects, actual insects, thankfully normal, began to explore the motionless human who had invaded their domain. One crawled across her cheek. Another explored the dried blood on her forehead. She let them, focusing her consciousness inward while maintaining awareness of the deadly dance occurring around her. The largest, Shadow Stalker clearly the pack. Leader approached until she could feel its breath on her face. Hot, carrying scents of ozone and something metallic. It was close enough to kill her with a single swipe, yet something held it back. In her research, she'd observed similar behavior. In Earth's great whites, when encountering sea turtles that played dead, predators expected certain responses from prey. Remove those responses, and you disrupted their entire behavioral matrix. Minutes crawled by. Her legs began to cramp from the meditation position, but she refused to adjust. The Shadow Stalkers continued their investigation, occasionally making soft vocalizations that sounded almost like conversation. Were they discussing her? Debating what she was? The thought was both terrifying and fascinating. Captain Torres of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike had once told her about surviving a space pirate attack by hiding in a cargo container for 14 hours. The human body can endure anything. If the mind commits completely, he'd said, pain is temporary. Death is permanent. She'd thought it was typical spacer bravado. Now she understood it was survival wisdom. 18 minutes in, one of the Shadow Stalkers touched her shoulder with what felt like a clawed appendage. The contact was almost gentle, exploratory rather than aggressive. Kira's every muscle wanted to flinch away, but she maintained her stillness. Whatever these creatures were learning about her, it was keeping her alive. As the 20th minute approached, she sensed a shift in their behavior. The pack was growing restless, uncertain. Their perfect hunting patterns were being disrupted by prey that refused to behave like prey. It was time to make her move. 20 minutes of absolute stillness had taught Kira-chun more about Shadow Stalkers than any xenobiologist had ever recorded. These weren't mindless killing machines. They were sophisticated pack hunters with complex behavioral patterns. And right now, those patterns were completely disrupted by her unprecedented response to their presence. The pack leader had circled her 17 times, each circuit growing tighter. 2 others maintained perimeter positions, while the remaining 3 continued their tentative investigations. She'd counted their respiratory patterns, mapped their movement cycles, and most importantly, identified their one critical weakness. They hunted by consensus. No individual Shadow Stalker would strike without some form of group confirmation, but consensus required recognizable prey behavior, and Kira was giving them none. Through her closed eyelids, she sensed the leader's growing agitation. It would approach within centimeters, pause, then retreat to confer with the others through those strange harmonic vocalizations. She'd heard similar communication patterns in pod hunting orcas, back on Earth complex social predators discussing strategy. The comparison would have fascinated her under different circumstances. A small insect had made its home in her hair, and another had begun constructing something that felt like a web between her fingers. The ecosystem was adapting to her as a landscape feature rather than a living organism. Even the local flora seemed to be treating her as inanimate. She could feel tiny root tendrils from nearby ground cover beginning to explore the edges of her boots. The Shadow Stalkers' dilemma was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. Their sensory systems were calibrated for detecting elevated heart rates, rapid breathing, and movement patterns associated with fear or aggression. Kira's controlled meditation state was registering her as something between living and dead, a biological anomaly that didn't fit their predatory algorithms. During her marine biology career, she'd observed similar confusion in great white sharks when encountering seal-shaped decoys. Predators relied on pattern recognition, and breaking those patterns created cognitive dissonance that could be exploited. But this was taking that principle to its absolute extreme. One of the younger pack members, she could distinguish it by its slightly different respiratory pattern approached her damaged ship. The emergency beacon was there, just 10 meters away, partially crushed but potentially functional if she could reach the manual activation switch. But timing would be everything. The shadow stalkers were positioned in a loose formation around her, their patrol routes creating brief windows when none of them had direct line of sight to the vessel. She'd been tracking their movements with the same methodical precision she'd once used to catalog deep-sea migration patterns. Pack leader completed circuits every 97 seconds. Perimeter guards shifted positions every 43 seconds. But their transitions created a 12-second gap in coverage of the ship's starboard side. The investigators had no fixed pattern, but they tended to focus on her for 30 to 40 seconds before moving to examine something else. The perfect moment was approaching a convergence of patrol patterns that would give her perhaps 5 seconds of opportunity. 5 seconds to cover 10 meters, activate the beacon, and return to her position before they realized what had happened. Impossible by normal standards, but Kira Chun had spent her career studying creatures that survived through perfect timing and explosive action. The pack leader began its 96th circuit. The perimeter guards shifted into their transition. The investigators turned their attention to something in the forest. Canopy.now. Kira exploded into motion with the precision of a striking mantis shrimp, the fastest predator in Earth's oceans. 20 minutes of absolute stillness had coiled, her muscles like compressed springs, and she unleashed that potential energy in one perfectly calculated burst. 3 long strides carried her to the wreckage. Her hand found the emergency beacon's manual activation switch just as the nearest shadow stalker registered her movement. The device's status light shifted from red to amber to green signal transmitting. But her gambit wasn't complete yet. Instead of continuing to run or seeking cover, she dove into a controlled roll and returned to her exact meditation position, resuming her motionless state with the same explosive precision she'd used to break it. The entire sequence had taken exactly 4.7 seconds. The effect on the shadow stalkers was immediate and profound. The pack leader's vocalization shifted to what could only be described as confusion, a rising harmonic that the others echoed with variations. They hadn't just witnessed prey behaving unexpectedly. They'd seen an apparently inanimate object suddenly exhibit complex motor behavior before returning to its previous state. From her renewed stillness, Kira could sense their agitation growing. One of the investigators approached the beacon, drawn by its new electronic humming, while the others focused on her with renewed intensity. But their behavioral patterns were completely scrambled now. The pack leader began a new circuit, but abandoned it halfway through. The perimeter guards abandoned their positions to crowd closer to her. This was exactly what she'd hoped for, and exactly what she'd feared. In her marine biology work, she'd observed that highly specialized predators often struggled more with unexpected situations than generalist species. Shadow stalkers had evolved to be perfect killers, but perfection came with rigidity. They were like a master chess program encountering a player who suddenly started moving pieces in patterns that weren't in any database. The pack leader made a decision. It approached her directly, no longer following its careful patrol pattern. The others formed a tighter circle. Kira could feel their eyes boring into her, sensed their frustration building. She'd broken their hunting algorithm, but broken predators could become unpredictably dangerous. Her heart rate remained controlled, but her mind raced through contingencies. The beacon was active. Rescue ships monitored emergency frequencies throughout the sector. but response time could be anywhere from 20 minutes to several hours. Could she maintain this psychological standoff that long? A new sound reached her ears, the distant rumble of atmospheric engines. Her pulse spiked before she could control. It and every shadow stalker in the pack immediately focused on that change. They detected her excitement, her hope. The spell was breaking. The pack leader let out a long, complex vocalization that sounded like a decision being made. The others responded with confirmations. Whatever debate they'd been having about her nature was ending. They were preparing to resume their roles as apex predators. But Kira had one more card to play, a realization that had been building throughout her 20-minute ordeal. These creatures weren't just confused by her behavior. They were learning from it. And if they could learn, they could be taught. As the engine sounds grew closer, she prepared for the most dangerous gambit of her life. Not just remaining still, but actively communicating with the galaxy's most feared predators. If she was wrong about their intelligence, the next few minutes would be her last. The rescue ship's engines grew louder, and the shadow stalkers tensed. For action. It was time to find out if 20 minutes of patience had taught her enough to save not just her own life, but potentially change how the galaxy understood these magnificent, terrifying creatures. The rescue ship Salvation's Edge descended. Through Zarian Prime's atmosphere, like a metallic angel, its engines casting dancing shadows across the forest floor. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the emergency channel. "Dr. Chun, we have your beacon. Prepare for immediate extraction. Be advised, we're reading multiple large life forms in your immediate vicinity." Kira remained motionless, but now she faced her greatest challenge yet. The approaching ship represented salvation, but it also threatened to undo everything she'd accomplished. These shadow stalkers had been learning, adapting, trying to understand what she was. The arrival of a second human presence could trigger their predatory instincts in ways her solitary stillness had avoided. The pack leader's vocalizations grew more complex, almost agitated. Through her closed eyes, Kira could sense the creatures. Conflict, part of their behavioral matrix, was responding to the approaching ship as a potential threat to their territory. Another part remained fixated on the puzzle she represented. Then she heard something that changed everything. One of the smaller shadow stalkers was mimicking her breathing pattern. The realization struck her like lightning. These weren't just intelligent predators. They were empathic learners. During her 20-minute meditation, they hadn't just been studying her. They'd been synchronizing with her. The pack leader's circling had gradually matched her heartbeat. Rhythm. The perimeter guards had shifted their positions in response to her controlled breathing cycles. As the Salvation's Edge touched down 50 meters away, Kira made a decision that would have seemed insane an hour ago. She spoke the first sound she'd made since sitting down. "Easy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Easy. The effect was immediate. Every shadow stalker froze, their attention laser-focused on this new development. She wasn't prey making distress calls. She wasn't a threat issuing challenges. She was something unprecedented, a being attempting to communicate. As an equal. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the ship with 2 armed crew members, weapons drawn. "Dr. Chun, move away from those creatures immediately." "No," Kira called back. "Still not moving. Lower your weapons. They're not attacking. Those are shadow stalkers. Nothing survives. I know what they are." Kira's voice carried the authority of someone who had just spent 20 minutes in direct communion with the galaxy's apex predators. "And I know what they're capable of. But right now, they're learning." The pack leader approached her once more, but this time its movement was different, cautious, almost respectful. It settled into a position that mirrored her meditation posture, just 3 meters away. The others followed suit, creating a circle of seated shadow stalkers around the motionless human. Captain Rodriguez stared in disbelief. This is impossible. These creatures have killed. These creatures, Kira interrupted softly, have never encountered anything like patience before. Every species they've hunted has responded with fear, aggression, or flight. I gave them something new to study. She slowly opened her eyes, meeting the pack leader's burning gaze directly. For a moment that stretched into eternity, human and Shadowstalker regarded each other as equals, two intelligent species separated by evolution, but connected by curiosity. I'm going to stand up now, she announced, addressing both the rescue crew and the Shadowstalkers. Slowly, the pack leader made a soft vocalization, not threatening, but acknowledging. Kira rose from her meditation position with fluid grace, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. The Shadowstalkers remained seated, watching her with what could only be described as fascination. As she walked toward the rescue ship, the pack leader stood as well, following at a respectful distance. The others fell into formation behind it, not stalking, but escorting. When she reached the ship's ramp, they stopped and settled back into seated positions. Dr. Chun, Captain Rodriguez whispered in amazement, what did you do to them? Kira turned back to look at the Shadowstalkers one final time. The pack leader inclined its head in what seemed unmistakably like a nod of acknowledgement. I listened, she said simply. For 20 minutes I listened, and they listened back. As the Salvation's edge lifted off, Kira watched through the viewport. As the Shadowstalkers remained in their circle, looking up at the departing ship, she had not just survived an encounter with the galaxy's most dangerous predators, she had opened a door to understanding between species that had been locked in one-sided conflict for millennia. The galaxy would never be the same. Asterisk.